My name is John Kinney. I was born and raised in northern Pennsylvania, right on the New York state line and on the headwaters of the Allegheny River before it flows into New York State. And it goes up in New York State for 30 or 40 miles and turns back around and comes back into Pennsylvania. It was a side hill farm in a little village, outside of a little village of about 2,000 people. I graduated there in 1936 and went to Penn State and graduated from Penn State in 1940 in an agricultural field. I worked as a manager of a large baby chick hatchery for a couple of years in the war. I graduated in 40, so along about 42 it was time to get interested in the military, and I didn't want to be drafted because I'd had 2 years of infantry ROTC and I was not interested in the infantry. I tried to enlist, and it took me from August of 1942 until April of 1943 to get enlisted. They were full. I had to have a tonsillectomy before they would take me, and then I finally was inducted in Wilmington, Delaware in April of 1942, shipped to Wilmington, or to Montgomery, Alabama, and went in cadet training and took my primary at Jackson, Mississippi, a Parks Air College field, which was a grass field, and it was had been a finishing school, I think, for girls. 2 big dormitories, 30 cadets to a dormitory. And I took my primary there and graduated. And then I went to Blytheville, Arkansas in basic and flew BT-13s. In primary, I had Stearman's, the famous old Stearman, which is still flying today. And I think there's what Stearman at the local airport here in Hagerstown. Very good airplane, very tough. There isn't an aerial maneuver that it can't do. Then I stayed at basic training and went to twin engine advance and graduated there in February of 43, 16th of February 43. 6 of us got immediate orders for a secret mission and hung around and trying to get it straightened out. We were on 24-hour call, and eventually we were put on an LST in New Orleans. We got to the Panama Canal and they come on board and took us off, and I spent a year in the Caribbean. I flew out of Panama, I flew out of Trinidad, I flew out of Puerto Rico, I flew out of Margarita, I was stationed at Dutch Guiana and flew out of British Guiana and French Guiana, and spent a year there. We did anti-submarine patrol, and we covered the southern convoys going to the southern route following the coastlines of the continents to Europe. And of course there was the northern route, which went around Greenland and Finland. While we were there, we also covered a 24-hour route from Dutch and British Guiana to Miami for cargo tankers carrying bauxite. Bauxite is a rusty, dirty-looking soil, which is the finest aluminum in the world, the ore coming from British Guiana and Dutch Guiana. So we covered those 24 hours a day for submarines. While there, the submarines begin to stay up and fire at us. We were flying B-18s, which is an old twin-engine bomber, which was the forerunner of a C-47, a DC-3, and it was the DC-3 before it had the round sides. It was flat side airliner, and American Airlines wanted the DC-3 to be round so they could put cots in for sleepers, and that was in 1936. It was a good old airplane. It had flotation gear. You could land it in the water and it would float. And it was a good, safe old airplane. We flew 24 hours a day, 1,000 feet of the bottom above the ocean. And it had English radar. The radar box was about 2 feet by 2 feet by about 2 feet deep. And the screen was probably 6 inches square, and in it, it had a range of about 23 miles, and you could, at night, you could fly up a convoy from the rear to the front of the convoy at 1,000 feet, fly 5 minutes ahead of the convoy, make a left turn, fly 5 minutes, make another left turn and fly 10 minutes, make a left turn and fly, then fly back up through the convoy again and make a right turn doing the same. So we'd do that for 6 hours on a convoy. 2 of us, we'd fly half hour on and a half hour off, black and on instruments the whole time. So we did that in the day and in the night. And the submarines got a little active there, and they torpedoed a convoy. And we could only go out so far with a twin-engine airplane, so a couple B-24s come in and they went out a lot further than we did to try to slow down the submarine activity, and they made a run on a sub that stayed up and fired back at them, and they had 50 caliber machine guns with the canvas covers on them. They weren't even loaded or anything. In the front turret in the submarine stayed up and fired at them, and they made a run on the sub, and as they approached the sub, they had their machine guns going, or a machine gun on the sub, and shot the bombardier through the hand and blew up the intervalometer, and the bombs dropped short. Well, we were on a patrol in the afternoon, and I said I was flying co-pilot for a pilot's name from Indiana, an old farm boy, and I said, let's go down where that attack was. It's only about 50 or 60 miles behind the convoy. And so we went down, and there was the sub, and it stayed up and started doing a lot of real active movement and so forth, and it started firing at us with an exploding shell. I since have learned they had a semi-automatic 40mm gun that could shoot out quite a ways, and the shell would explode, and we would get too close and the shells would start exploding. And of course we had to get a message off that we were making a run on the sub because we thought we'd be shot down, and they ought to know where the location of the sub was. And while we're doing that, we kept circling the sub. As soon as we got the message off by radio on the radio operator, we made a run on the sub as it was going down, and we dropped, I don't know how many depth charges. We probably dropped we probably carried 4. We probably dropped all 4. I think they weighed 500 and some pounds apiece. And we thought we got a little bit of residue. We weren't sure. And we stayed till dark. We were running out of gas. We went into French Guiana. There was an emergency strip there. Got fuel and got home that night about 11 o'clock. And the next morning, we heard that the sub had surfaced during the night. And due to a problem that we had caused in their battery system, so it surrendered to a Navy P-boat, a patrol boat, the next day. Now, that is the story as I saw it and as I remember it. You can get on the computer and look up the history of that submarine, and it will tell you that we were shot down and drowned. And I was killed, and they didn't. And the Navy came in with and got the sub in a day or so. And it's not like the story that I remember at all. We worked for the Navy. We didn't keep any records at all. We reported everything to the Navy, and that's the Navy story. And isn't it amazing how it got screwed up from the Navy writing it down at Recife or someplace in Brazil that would get it so screwed up. But that's the official story of that sub. Then I was transferred to another squadron in Trinidad, and the submarines were what they called, they had a milk cow. It was a supply sub that would come over in the Caribbean and supply food and fuel to submarines that would stay over there. And in the meantime, after they had shot us up, they gave us brand new B-25 bombers with a 75 millimeter cannon in the nose and 4 50 caliber machine guns across the nose and 2 each side of the cockpit. That's 8 forward firing machine guns. And we did patrol with those, but we didn't see anything to get. And they shipped us over to Panama on an emergency, so I spent several months in Panama going up and down the coastlines of Panama looking for these milk cows that would supplying the submarines. However, I never saw any. And after about a year in the service there, I flew B-25 back to the United States, and they were building the B-29, and the Consolidated was building the B-32, which is a big 4-engine bomber like the B-29, and they sent us to B-24 transition school, which is the diploma on the wall there of it. And then we were to go in B-32s, but their program was slipping. So after we'd gone to B-24 transition, they didn't have any place for us. We went to I picked up a crew in Davis Monathan Field in Tucson, Arizona, trained them. I was train commander, took them to shipping to Boston, and during the Battle of the Bulge, and everything was rushed and really crazy during the Battle of the Bulge. I had armed guards on the doors of the train and everything. I processed them, loaded them in the middle of the night in a thunderstorm. We had to walk about 3 miles. Trucks couldn't run in the snow, so we waded in the snow to our knees and issued leggings to everyone. And I had 23 crews. And then we loaded on the Ile-de-France. The Ile-de-France was the 4th largest ship in the world at the time. We loaded 12,800 that night, and in Massachusetts, they loaded also the Queen Mary in New York, 18,000 on it that night. And in 5 days, we were in the Irish Sea between England and Ireland, and I was on A deck because I was a troop commander, and we were bunked 3 high, and the guy in the middle bunk above me fell out of bed on the floor, and I woke me up, and I realized that we were in a pretty good list bank, and I was near a porthole, and I slipped the curtain over, and I could see a big wake in the ocean, and I knew that we were under submarine attack, having gone to several submarine schools, and we were under attack, and we got lots of attention with airplanes and stuff. But that night we pulled into Glasgow, and the commander of the harbor welcomed us aboard, saying that they were happy to see us. The German news had reported they'd sunk a troop ship with 12,800 on board. So they unloaded us in England, in Glasgow, and I went to a reception center in Scotland, and I believe I was given 5 crews, and I took them across a field to a railroad track and loaded them on an English train, took them to London, and we had all our flight gear and clothing and everything, of course, so we had to transfer all our own luggage on. The English trains are much smaller than our trains, and we had to load our own luggage on a rail car along in the passenger train. And I couldn't tell which railhead in London that I was supposed to load on, and I remember going up to this English lady, middle-aged lady, weather-beaten, working hard, and she was information. And the name of the village that we were going to was Bungay. Well, I asked her which railhead would I want to load my troops on for Bungay, Bungay. And she said there isn't a place like that. So I got my orders out, and I spelled it for her, Bungay. She said, "Oh, shite, Yank, you can speak plainer than that. It's Bungay." Well, I got my troops loaded, and we got loaded, and we got to Bungay about 11 or 12 o'clock that night. And I unloaded in the rail station, everything black, and we got a match. A fella held a match for me, and I got on the telephone and rang the American Air Base I asked for, and whoever answered said, "Someone's fish market." And I said, "Well, I'm calling the American Air Base." And he said, "Oh, I'm just being funny. This is the American Air Base." And he laughed, and I told him I needed 5 trucks because I had troops. And he said, "Well, I don't think we can't do that tonight." And I said, "Well, you better get the officer of the day." And he said, "Well, he's not here right now." Well, I said, "You get him," because I got hungry troops, and it's the middle of the night. Just then he apparently walked in anyway. They came and loaded us, took us out, and we had only a little package of K rations for lunch, which is packed in waterproof brown wrapper, and it's got a can of bacon in, I guess, or eggs, and some gum and some crackers. And that's all we'd had since early breakfast. And I took them. I rode with the first truck, and I said, "Take us to the enlisted mess. I've got to feed these troops." And I went, and the mess sergeant said, "We're getting ready to feed. We've got a mission going on, and we're getting ready to feed them. We can't feed you." So I got in the truck and told the driver to take the convoy to the officers' mess. Well, they told me the same, and I'm standing out in the outside of the officers' club, and it was built in a grove of nice big old evergreen trees, and I'm standing there and under an evergreen tree, and a little man walked up to me who turned out to be a chaplain, our chaplain, and a great guy, and a major, and he was there something he could do for me, and I told him my problem. He said, I'll be back, just stay here. And I think that the commanding officer of the base, Colonel Crawford, lived right in a little hut right behind the officers' club, because he went around behind the officers' club. In a few minutes he was back, and he said, take everyone in the officers' mess and they'll feed you. So that's how I arrived, and we finally got Bill. They put me in an old church that had my crew was in an old church with it was like a stone floor or something, in no heat, and they give you a cot to sleep on and 7 blankets. Now you had 7 blankets because you put 3 of them under you, folding them up about the width of a cot, and put 3 under you and 4 on top of you. And the next day they came and processed us, and and the next day I had a check ride. A captain come and picked me up and took me and said, I want to give you a check ride. So he took me out and rode his co-pilot, and I flew him around, and he showed me the procedure at the base and the language and everything we used there, and checked me out and took me to where my barracks were, and I went in, and the next day I flew a mission as a co-pilot. Can I take a break here?
Absolutely, yeah.
As a co-pilot and we flew in the number 4 position, they called it the bucket. We flew behind and below the lead plane, and we had one on our right and one on our left. So of the 10-ship formation, we were number 4, and we took off and climbed. It took us about an hour. We usually formed in formation over our base at about 15,000 feet, and loaded. I flew with in the number 4 position, and we formed at, I guess, 15,000 feet. We could only climb loaded. We weighed 67,000 pounds on takeoff on a 6,000 foot runway. We pulled 54 inches of manifold pressure and 2,800 RPM on the trops. And it took every inch of 6,000 feet to get off, and we could only climb 200 feet a minute. So if we were at 15,000 feet, you can see how we had we would fly 10 minutes, turn around and come back 10 minutes. We all each had our own path, and you would probably break out someplace around 12 or 13,000 feet, and we formed it, and they would be a formation ship or the lead ship for 10 airplanes, and there would be three groups of 10. So our group would have 30 airplanes, and each group had its own color flares, and the lead ship fired the colors for the formation of that day, so you could tell, because they're forming all over the whole area, 1,000 airplanes in a 50-mile area, I suppose. Anyway, say we were forming, our flare was red, green, green. You get a red and 2 green ones, that would be. So climbing in the dark or you could see where your group was, so you climb up and you eventually get in formation, a 10-ship formation. That took about 45 minutes or so because you're loaded, and the lead ship then takes you and heads for the assembly line, which was about 30 or 40 miles, and they're coming in from all the different air bases at the division assembly line. Now you have a lead crew. I had a lead crew, 3 navigators. You have 3 navigators, and so that they really, it's not a matter of minutes, it's a matter of seconds. You head down to get to a certain point, and we had G boxes, which was like a little radar they had, would put us in a pretty good position. And of course we would fly toward the assembly point and make a right turn and put our formation in 3 minutes from the ship, the group ahead of us. No, 6 minutes. Each group was 6 minutes apart. That was 30 airplanes, then 6 minutes, 6 more. And so we were stretched out, heading for Germany, 1,000 of us, B-17s and B-24s. The B-24s cruised at 160 mile an hour. The B-17s cruised at 155 mile an hour. So we often led or had a separate target close by so we wouldn't interfere with their speed. We carried 3 ton of bombs. They carried, in most cases, 2.5 ton of bombs. We were crossing into just crossed over at Antwerp, just crossed off of the North Sea, and we must have gotten into a flak battery, had moved in and shot our wingman off, our right wingman. He must have hit him into Bombay right forward, which must have ruptured a fuel tanks in the wings because it broke out in a fire. And I mean, the pilot that I was flying with kept screaming on the radio. It was his friend, and he was screaming to him to bail out. But he did pull out of formation, pulled up a little bit, and the right wing peeled off, broke right near the base, and there was a tremendous explosion. And I tried to see if I could see a man or an engine falling. I couldn't. It was just in pieces. I've never seen anything disintegrate like that in my life. And it just went on down, and we continued. Needless to say, I was ready to go home. But we flew the mission. We went about 30 miles from Berlin to a big synthetic refinery there, Magdeburg. The next 4 missions I flew all went to Magdeburg. So I flew that mission with him, and I flew my turn and he flew his, and the next day I flew in the formation as tail end Charlie. When you're a new pilot, they don't know what kind of a formation pilot you are, and there are some bad ones. They put you out on the back end to the right or left, and if you get in trouble, well, you're in trouble by yourself. You're not going to hurt anybody. So I flew that position, and I flew 4 more positions, and then I was picked as I started lead crew training, and I didn't want to lead crew, but I had no choice. I went and said I didn't want lead crew, and the commanding officer said, well, you're going to be a lead crew pilot. So they gave me 2 more navigators, and I became a lead crew and trained. And I did not finish my missions over there because the war ended. I was about a month before the war ended, I was in operations, and of course I went over as a first lieutenant, and I was at operations, and one of our operations clerks was a DuPont from Wilmington, a fine gentleman. And he said, I just have a telegraph here on you. Your captaincy has been approved, and as soon as Jimmy Doolittle signs it, you'll be a captain. And he said, you know, you'll have to put a party on at the officers club. And he said, you know, it's going to cost you some money, and if you need some more money, let me know. I'll help you. He said, I'll give you a couple $100 to help for the party. And of course, the war ended and I didn't make captain. So I flew a brand new airplane back, had 3 missions on it, to the United States. I flew from Bungay to Glasgow, Scotland, and briefed for Iceland. Landed at Iceland 11 o'clock at night in June, and it was daylight. In the tower, I remember the tower saying, have you ever landed here before? And I said, no. And they said, well, we caution you, you've got a 35-mile-an-hour steady headwind, and the end of the runway is a 35-foot drop down to the ocean. So it's very easy to undershoot the runway, so we caution you. So I landed there, and gosh, they put me in and the wind's blowing, you have to walk at an angle up there, all the rocks are round with the wind blowing them round and everything, and they put me in a little Nissen hut with dirt all around it so it wouldn't blow away. And I went to bed for an hour or so, and they woke me up and said, you're number 1 for Goose Bay. So I flew 1,797 statute miles, I think. Boy, it was a long, of course it was daylight all night, but, and the night before we had all been out, we knew we weren't going to leave the next day, we thought anyway, and we all went to a little inn that you could walk down across the pasture, and we went down there and drank nut brown Scotch ale and shot darts. And I never drank that much Scotch ale in my life, but I drank 8 pints of it. We all did. And then at about 6 o'clock the next morning, surprise, we took off. And my co-pilot did the same, and the autopilot wasn't working. And here we are flying hour after hour, and I don't know if you know what a whiteout is, but that time of the year, it's daylight all the time, and the snow is on everything, and everything is white. You can't tell where the ground is or anything. The sky is white, or the atmosphere is white, the ground is white, and that's all you see is this whiteout. And I thought, oh, I'll be able to see, and every time I'd say to the co-pilot, John, take her a while. Oh, my head, he'd say. Well, we got to Goose Bay about 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. I remember this, and we could tell by the cloud cover we ought to be getting close, and I talked to Frank, the navigator, and I said, we ought to be getting pretty close. He said, well, the cloud cover's changing, and he said, we ought to be approaching land. And I pushed the button down, and I give Goose Bay a call, and gosh, he come back so clear, and he said that the weather is good here. There's an overcast, and I said, am I going to have to make an instrument letdown? And he said, when you get close enough, there's a nice hole in the clouds, several miles in diameter, and if you could make a circle let down and let right down, and you're number 1 in traffic. And there was the hole, and I let down and landed and went in and turned my briefcase in and my orders and stuff at the counter and signed the airplane in. And there was a major behind the counter, and here it is, 7 o'clock in the morning. And I thought it was supper time, and I was hungry, and I said, what time are they serving dinner in the Officers Club. He said, where the hell have you been, Lieutenant? I said, coming across the pond. He said, well, for your information, they're serving breakfast. Boy, I went in and had breakfast and went to bed, and I didn't fly the next day. We flew the next day, flew back to the States and landed in Boston and turned the airplane in, and that's the last airplane I ever flew in the military. I shipped there down, went to New Jersey. My wife met me there from Philadelphia, and when I went back, I went back to Sioux Falls, South Dakota by train. She didn't go with me, and there were 44,000 officers, major and under, at Sioux Falls, South Dakota. We had double-decker beds. A major slept over me, and I slept under him. We were so close we had to go sideways, and they were so busy they fed us from breakfast was from 8 to 11, and supper was from 4 till 8. They only fed us twice a day. Nothing to do, and they were harvesting there. It was in July, and it was a farm area at Sioux Falls, and a lot of the guys, they brought buses in and picked them up, and they went out and worked for the farmers, and they had a big time over that. And then from there I got on a train and we went to, well, while I was there, they had a special meeting, and they said, go by some of the bulletin boards in the officers club, there's special bulletin. And I went, and there were 54 names on that bulletin, and I was on it. And we were all the old sub-pilots. They could make B-29s faster than they could train good captains for the crews. And they were going to pick out 57 first lieutenants and captains and give them a trained crew and put the crew captain back through training again and give us 15 hours in a B-29 and make up a group, experimental group, and ship them to England or to the Pacific. And so I was on that. But that night I had a kidney infection, and I got in the hospital, and I didn't go, but they did and went on and went over. So I didn't go with that group, so I didn't get checked out on a B-29. They eventually shipped me to Deming, New Mexico, and to get flight pay, you had to fly 4 hours. And of course, flight pay was 50% of your base pay extra. So I flew in a B-26 as a co-pilot and got my flight time, and then I shipped home, and my wife didn't want me to stay in the service, so I didn't. I was a reserve officer, I could have, but I didn't. So that's the story.
Well, if you don't mind me asking you some questions then.
Pardon?
Do you remember where you were and what you were doing on December 7th, 41?
Yes. My wife and I were getting pretty serious, and you could not be a married and be a cadet then. And you had to have 2 years of college, and you had to be not over 26 years of age, 21 to 26, I guess. And so when I enlisted, we didn't have any money. She was a public health nurse for the state of Pennsylvania. And so she had a good job in a state car with a seal on it and a uniform and everything. So she stayed, and I shipped and went out, and we had been for a walk that day out in the country, and we come back to the drugstore to get a bag of Hershey Kisses, and her in her little village that she was outside of Philadelphia, 1,500 people, called West Grove. Her cousin owned the drugstore, and I went in the drugstore, and he's cussing and swearing, the sons of bitches and everything, and I said, "What's going on?" And he said, "Pearl Harbor, the Japanese had just..." So it wasn't long after that that I left for the service.
Now, with that said, what caused you to want to join the Army Air Corps of all things? Why do you want to be a pilot?
I'd never flown in my life. My first time out to the airplane, when I first got to that air base, out in the country, grass field, had been a private field, and I could look up across this dirt road and see this grass field, and I could see a guy with a parachute, and I couldn't stand to look at the parachute. I looked away because I didn't know what it would be like, and when I went, and my instructor met four of us and asked us our name and had we ever flown, and one of the guys had flown, but I remember what he said to me. He said, "Have you ever flown?" "No, never been in an airplane." He said, "Good, then I won't have to teach you any or break any of your bad habits." And he showed me how to put the chute on, and I went out to the steerman, and we walked out, and he said, "Now this is how you get in. You get in, open cockpit, a steerman's open cockpit, and the student flew in the back seat." And he showed me, he said, "You get in the left side of an airplane, and you puke out the right side." And he said, "And you clean up your own puke." So that was my first ride in a steerman.
Right. So what instilled in you to actually do that, though? Like, why did you want to be in the Air Corps of all things?
Because I didn't want to be in the infantry.
And that's it, just don't want to be in the infantry, I'll be a pilot.
I'll tell you really why I did. I thought it was a way to learn a new trade. I'd been to college and I had a degree in agriculture, but there was a new way to learn something new instead of being a foot soldier.
Right.
And that was the reason, because I thought I could learn something new, and that's how I went in.
Wow. So how many hours did you log in the sub patrols then?
Yeah, pardon?
How many hours did you log in sub patrol?
How many hours what?
How many hours did you log when you was doing sub patrols?
On sub patrol?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know, 800 or 900, I suppose. I don't know.
Wow.
6 hours at a time, sit out there flying instruments.
So when you went overseas then to England, what unit were you based with when you went over there?
I was with the 446 bomb group,
What squadron?
and I was the 707th Squadron.
And how many missions did you complete?
I didn't complete my 30.
Right. How many did you actually do?
Well, I just as soon not tell you. Everybody asks me that, and I'm embarrassed that I didn't finish, so I just don't answer. But I had plenty, and some tough ones. Unfortunately, I had some tough missions. I've had some real tough times. I lost 5 engines. I've had 5 3-engine landings in B-24s.
Wow. Any of those stick out particularly to you? Or,
Any what?
do any of those times stick out to you? Anything special that happened on them?
Well, some had a direct shot in the accessory section in number 2. Some of them blew a blown cylinder on one and it caught on fire in the middle of the night in training, and had to make an emergency landing. And that's an experience where you got an engine on fire and you look down at the runway 10 miles up ahead and you're making a straight-in approach, and all you can see when they line up for an emergency, the first vehicle, they line up 3/4 of the way down the runway, along the edge of the runway. You're back a couple hundred feet so you don't run into them, but first vehicle is a phone truck. This was pretty much standard. Then there'll probably be 3 crash trucks. And then there will be probably 3 at least ambulances. And then maybe a staff car with somebody, the CO or something. And when you, and they all have floodlights on, and you land and get the brakes on and bail out of that thing as fast as you can, and they put the fire out. And so I've had 5 5 engine failures.
Did you ever have to bail out of an airplane?
Nope. Been ready. We had the crew ready one time, but we didn't have to.
What was the story behind that?
Well, we were going to bomb the Admiral Scheer up on the North Sea, and I was deputy lead in a new airplane, lost brand new airplane, and kept losing superchargers. I lost the 2 spare superchargers and 2 more. So I only had 2 engines pulling full power at 21,000 feet, and 2 of them just windmilling hardly, and I couldn't keep up. So I gave up my lead position and cut across a little bit. I thought, and I could, because we were close to the target, I could cut the leg off. You always made a turn before you bombed, so that let your formation on that turn get in position. And I got in some flak and got shot up pretty good. But I come on home on the North Sea all the way and working air sea rescue. And I saw two ditchings. One of them, I was working air sea rescue. It was 600 and some miles North Sea that day. And the temperature, they said, was 33 degrees, the water. They said we could live for about 16 minutes if we got wet. Anyway, I was working air sea rescue and listening to them. And one of them ditched right under me. The co-pilot was flying, and I had my head in the bubble out the side window, and I was watching him, and he ditched and just disappeared. And then about 15 or 20, or I don't know, an hour maybe later, I heard another one working air sea rescue, and he was up ahead 2 or 3 miles, and I saw him ditch and he disappeared. And of course I was working air sea rescue because I was having big problems, and when I made a landfall on England, and it was North Sea all the way that day, I remember checking with, and I said, well, I can see landfall and I'm going to make it. And he said, well, good luck, and I'm glad you made it. He said, we had 12 ditchings today, and we haven't saved one person yet. So I don't know how many of us would have been on that mission. Several hundred, maybe 700 or 800, I don't know. But anyway, they had 12 of them ditched and none of them made it.
Wow.
And so we always lost airplanes every day.
Do you remember some of the towns that you had bombed?
Towns?
Yeah.
Well, Magdeburg, and I was deputy lead on our group on the largest raid ever on Berlin. 1,000 of us went to Berlin that day, and I was deputy lead on our group, and we were the 7th group over the target, and we had 500-pound bombs. Would be 12 of them, spaced 250 feet apart. We just went right down through the center of Berlin. We just about tore Berlin down. There was no reason to do it. I understood later, I've read that Eisenhower and the Air Force General, I say his name all the time, but they didn't want the raid. They thought it was a silly raid. The war was winding down, but the British wanted to bomb Berlin, so we were part of it. and we just about wiped it out. We have a woman that did live in Greencastle. She's dead now and lived in North Berlin and worked in South Berlin. And she said she went to work that morning and it took her 4 days to get home after that raid. But if you can imagine just stringing out 250 feet apart, 500 pounders, just 1,000 of us doing that. We were aimed right at the city. I don't know where the others were aimed, different places, but our target was the center of the city. Terrible.
So, do you have any funny experiences that you can remember?
Any what?
Funny experiences from the service?
Yeah, I can tell you a real funny one. When you put a rebuild or a new engine on an airplane, you had to slow time it. It took 4 hours to break that engine in. And the tower had called me and wanted to know what I sliced. I did a lot of testing of airplanes, okayed them for combat and stuff, being a lead pilot, and they wanted to know would I slow time an airplane. And I said, sure. And as soon as lunch is over, I'll go, and I'm eating lunch at the officers' club, and a ground officer that I did not remember ever seeing him, but he could have worked in headquarters. I never would have seen him. Maybe he wasn't even in our group, I don't know, but he said, I understand you're going to be flying today 4 hours, and would you mind taking me up to Edinburgh, Scotland, to go on leave? Well, I might just as well fly up there and see the country as go fly around 4 hours doing nothing. So I said, sure, get a chute. And the truck will leave operations at 1 o'clock and we'll go up and the chaplain's at the table. And he said, John, can I go along? Sure, you can go along. And the flight surgeon, I had migraine headaches, so I always had special medicine the flight surgeon gave me before a mission. And Doc said, can I go along? Sure, you can go along. So we got out to the airplane, and the new engine was number 4. That's the 4th one on the right, clear out. And we checked her all out and took off. And I can remember it so well. You know, as soon as you leave the ground, you got your right hand on the throttles and your left hand on the controls. And when you want your gear up, you holler at him, gear up, and you go like this with your thumb off of the throttle. And he pushes the lever and the gear starts up. And number 4 just quit like that. That was the new one on takeoff. If I'd have been loaded, it would have been, you'd never made it. But being empty, and we probably only had 1,200 gallon of gas on board or something instead of 2,700.
Right.
So I pulled up around and I'm doing all right, and I called the tower, I can remember so well. And I just lost number 4 and clear the traffic because in about 30 seconds or so, someone started screaming, we're on fire. And the smoke was coming up around the rudder pedals, the batteries caught on fire. I don't know why. But that acrid smoke coming off the batteries was coming up under the instrument panel. Because I sat right over the batteries. My compartment was right above it. And things got pretty exciting. And because I knew I couldn't, if I breathed some of that acrid smoke, we're done. I pulled the side window over and I'd take a breath of air out at the window, right, and hold it and fly. And I called the tower and I said, I don't know what runway, but I'll have to, as soon as I can't make it anymore, I'm going to take anything that's available. And we're coming in for a landing. And I'm not very high, and I put the gear back down, and we're coming in, and I'm breathing out of the side window. And the chaplain, and I'm pretty busy. I'm pretty excited. And we're coming in, and the chaplain works his way up. You know, the throttles are here, and your seat's here, and there's room between.
Right.
And he comes up, and he's tapping me on the shoulder, and he gets down. And when you're in the pilot's seat, you wear your headset on your ear, on your left ear, but your right headset sticks on your head so you can talk to the co-pilot back and forth. Well, he gets down in my right ear, and he says, "John, do you think we're going to make it?" And I had to laugh, even though I was busy. Here's the chaplain asking me, did I think I'm going to make it? That's about all.
What did you tell him? How do you tell the chaplain no?
I said, "Yeah, Chappie, we're going to make her." But I laughed. I remember that. I thought that was so funny.
So during your time in the service, and I guess even afterwards, how much did you drink? And what was your alcohol consumption like?
I was very little. I wasn't a drinker. I never went to the club and made an ass out of myself or drank. Neither did the co-pilot. They never. A couple of my crews could get a little bit oiled up, but I never did. No, I had a beer or two, and if I had it, I would drink a Canadian Club and soda once in a while. Other than that, some guys lived on alcohol, but I didn't.
What about smoking? You ever used tobacco?
No, I never. I smoked corn silk as a kid, and I probably bought 2 packs of cigarettes in my life and tried it, and I never liked the taste of the damn things, and so I've never smoked.
That's good.
Yep.
When you was in combat and you're flying these missions, and you're seeing some of the most horrible things, what kept you going? Are you scared? What are you thinking about? What makes you tick?
Well, let me tell you, I didn't realize this afterward when we went to reunions and the crew was there. Take the tail gunner and take the waist gunner, and maybe I didn't communicate enough with them. I'm busy. I knew I'm probably, the co-pilot and I are probably no more going on than anybody else, because I'm running the show and doing the talking, and I know I can hear what other pilots are doing and stuff. And the crew, like the waist gunners, they didn't know a lot of the things. I don't think I told them what was going on up ahead. I know when we got where we break up to go and trail to hit the target, the tail gunner would always call me and say, "What's it look like up front?" Because he's riding backwards 70 feet behind me,
Right.
And he wants to know, and I realized that, but I think I should have briefed him more on what I was thinking and what was really going on. I feel guilty about that, but I was busy and running the airplane, and I just assume, I guess, of course they were on the interphone, they should have been able, but it seemed like when we go to reunions, they couldn't remember those things.
Right.
So I probably was guilty.
So when you were actually in those situations and you're in the moment, were you scared?
No, I don't think so. I guess I schooled them this way, that we're going to make it. You can count on it. I always felt that I was going to make it, that I had the ability to. I always felt confident. So once I got some time and got to know that old airplane, I was considered a good pilot, and everyone liked to ride with me, and I was confident. Was I worried? I was too busy, I think. When you got in trouble and you got a flat tire and you got a fire in an engine and you're coming in, you got to get that old thing on the ground, and you're talking to the tower and you're fighting the airplane and you're busy. half of being a pilot's not how you handle the airplane, it's how you use your head. That's more important than anything else. And I think I was always busy, and yes, I've said prayers a lot and prayed on a couple occasions, terrible. And I made it. I was afraid that time, I think, in a hurricane with another pilot one time. But, yeah, I guess I was scared.
You didn't have time to be scared.
That's probably a good answer. Yeah.
But when you had
You're
the
busy.
downtime, right?
I'm busy. You got an engine out and you're in traffic and you're on fire and
So, looking back, what is your greatest accomplishment, in your opinion, about your career in the military?
oh, that I was able to be a good pilot. I was considered a good pilot. So I'm told in the outfit. Yeah, I was considered a good pilot.
That's good. So after the war is over, you go home, you get discharged. What do you do with your life then?
Well, I became a salesman for an outfit that was a part of Diamond Ice and Coal Company in Wilmington, Delaware, part of the DuPont Company. And then I had worked for a baby chick hatchery, and two other men that had money, and I didn't have a lot. We built a big turkey hatchery in Pennsylvania, and we ran out of money and went bankrupt. And from then on, I worked. Yeah.
Did you ever go back to flying at all, and
No.
for personal fun, or?
No. I became a technical writer.
Really?
And I wrote flight manuals mostly. My specialty was flight manuals for the Air Force for pilots. And I went to work at Fairchild as a technical writer and went right to flight manuals and for the Navy and the Marines and the Air Force. So I wound up 25 years as a technical writer.
Wow.
And I toured all over if they needed a change done, I would do the change, add the new equipment and new procedures, write new stuff, and then the pilots, about 5 or 6 of them, or 8 or 10 of them, would get together for a week and review it. We'd go through everything, and I'd make changes, and then they would sign it off and we'd publish it. So that's what I did for my last 25 years.
That's crazy.
So I got to travel all over to Hawaii, and I had some pretty good jobs. I was a technical writer for the Crested Rooster program that was recovering space vehicles. They weighed about 1,000 pounds. They were gold plated, returning, and they didn't have the Navy was covering them from the Navy, and I had a program called the Crested Rooster where they modified 6 big helicopters, and they could stay out with extra gas tanks and stuff, and they had a winch on the back, could lift that gold. They weighed it half a ton, and they could lift that up in the back of the helicopter. And so I got to go to Hawaii for a long time and went through a lot. Very interesting, traveled all over and met a lot of people, and I was on some real interesting programs, and I was the writer.
That's awesome.
So it was, yeah, I got to, oh yeah, and I wrote the gunship, the flight manual for the gunship, you know, where they had the guns in the side of it and the cannon on the back and stuff. I wrote that manual from the very beginning. So I got to meet a lot of those pilots from combat. They became good friends of mine, and
wow.
And we'd spend weekends together when we were reviewing it and stuff. So I had a lot of experiences. Met a lot of fine men.
So when did you ultimately retire then?
Well, I was 60. the boss and I didn't get along too good. He was sort of slow. Anyway, he and I didn't always agree, and I was in his hair on a program. I had a lot of people working for me, and writers, and there was one guy who was terrific, and and he promised me he'd give him $1 raise, and he didn't give it to him. He said, "I'm not going to," and I said, "Well, how about I retire and do a job for you? I'll work in my office in the home." And we had a job, C-130s, countries in the Mideast would have a C-130 catered for them, do the right equipment they want in it and all those. I think there were 7 of them. Iran and places like that. Then they wouldn't take them. So there were 7 of them that had been sitting around for a year or two, and the Coast Guard needed them. So each of them had to be, their peculiarities and so forth had to be put in a flight manual for the Coast Guard. So that took a year. So I traveled with the Coast Guard and wrote their flight manual for them. And I did that in an office in my home in Greencastle here. I took the kids' bedroom, and this is the desk I built, and this is where I did it. And then I would go and get with the pilots, and that was the last job I did.
What year was that?
Oh, I suppose 66, 67, along in there sometimes.
Wow.
1967 or, yeah, about that. I don't know, I'd have to look it up.
Right.
Then I retired.
Well, do you have any last comments that you'd like to say about your service? Or
Pardon?
do you have any other comments you'd like to say before we close the interview about your service or about life in general?
I've had a good life, and I had a terrific wife, a nurse, great mother, 3 good kids, and I've had a good life. Never made a lot of money, but I've had a good life, and I was active. I was on the school board for 2 different times for a total of 18 years, and there's one of the documents they gave me right there. I was considered a good reformer for the school district here. People moved to Greencastle, because of the school system now, and they tell me that I was president when that took place, so that's about all.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Is that all right?